Hi everyone, welcome to Functions lecture. So in this lecture we're going to cover 3 different examples of how to use functions. So firstly, they reduce the amount of code, making our code more dry, which stands for don't repeat yourself. They can be called anywhere. Functions must have a unique name. They can have multiple parameters, arguments, default parameters, or none. And lastly, a function can be pure or impure. And we'll see what that means with our first example. So let's take a look. Okay, so you can see here that we simply have a1 plus a2 equals 30. So let's convert this into a function. So what we'll do is def for define, and then we give it a unique name for our function. Then we have parentheses here, open and close. Then a colon, enter, and we have an indentation here. So we have to put this a1 plus a2 into a code block here. So we'll just hit the tab to move it to the right. Then we put in return to get the value. And now if I do square, just run it on its own, you can see function, main, and square. So we want to run the actual function itself. We've put these open and close parentheses, run it, and we get the output as expected of 30. Okay, so let's say, for example, I want to put in, let's just do a plus b. It doesn't have to be a1 and a2. We can just ignore those, actually. Okay, so if I run that, we're going to get something of an issue here. So name error, and that's because B is not defined. I've actually defined A previously when I was running the Jupyter Notebook. But what we can do is define A and B. So A and B as parameters. Now if I run this, we're going to get another error. And that's because A and B don't have any values. It's missing 2 required positional arguments. So we have to give them values. So we'll put in, let's say, 200, and we'll do, let's say, 40. Now if I run it, we get 240. Okay, great. But what I'd like to do is have a default value. So I'd like to be able to run it like this without the actual error that we have here, this type error. So what I can do is give A and B their own default values. So we'll do, let's say, 300, and B will do, let's say, 400. Run it, and if I run it on its own, you can see I get the default value of 700. Okay, great. But I can also override these values. So we do 1000, and let's do 500. Now I have 1500. And what I can also do is grab the value. So I can do s equals, and now if I go here, you can see I get the actual value itself. So I can do, let's say, 10, and we get 15,000 here. However, if I were to, let's say, comment out the return, we don't strictly have to have a return in a Python function. We could just do a print statement. So a plus b, and if I run this and then do s, you can see I get nothing here because all we have in this one, the output, is just a print statement. So if I were to do equal to none, we get true. So what I can do is simply do this, get the return, run this again, and now if I run this, it's going to be false. That's because s is actually a value now. Okay, great. So let's say we want to have a docstring. So what exactly is a docstring? Well, it describes what our function does. So I'm just holding the shift and then hitting the double quotation marks. So we have 6 of them, and in between, this is a docstring for a function. Multiple lines here. Okay, so run that. And now if I go here where we have the parentheses and just hold the shift and then click as many times as necessary the tab button. You can see here, let's click it again. You can see I've got the signature, the docstring, the file with the location of our function, and then the type, which is of course a function. So this is our docstring that describes what our function does. All right, let's take a look and see another way of finding out if it's a function. So we do type, and then we do square, and we get function as expected. Okay, great. So what about the difference between a pure and impure function? Well, square is a pure function. That's because it's using its parameters. It's not using anything else. Whereas if I were to do another one, let's say I remove that, and we'll do, let's say, c equals 100, and we'll do triangle. So a, b, and we'll leave that as it is. Return a plus b plus c. So if I do triangle, let's say 200, 300, and I run this, we get 600. So triangle is actually an impure function, and the reason being is because this value here, c, isn't actually used as a parameter for the triangle function. whereas square uses all of its parameters. It doesn't use anything outside of itself. So that's why square is a pure function. Okay, so let's take a look at the next example. And it's quite simple. Shouldn't be intimidated by the code. So you can see here it's a while loop, and we have a list of questions. So these are strings here, 3 questions. And we're simply iterating over each of the questions. So len questions, so in this case it's going to be 3. And then we're counting, we're incrementing the x by 1 each time. And then we're appending the values from the inputs. So what we can do is just run this, just put in A, B, blah. Doesn't really matter, that's not really our concern here. But we have our list here, A, B, and C, or rather A, B, and blah. So let's convert this into a function. So what I'd like you to do is just pause the video and convert this into a function from these lines here. So from line 4 all the way down to line 10. So pause the video now and give that a go. Okay, hopefully you've given it a go. All we have to do, it's very simple, is we'll call this, doesn't really matter, but I'm going to give it a more meaningful name. We'll have questions equals an empty list, so default value just in case. And then I'm just going to highlight all of the lines here up to the answer, put that to the right with a shift, return, and that should be sufficient. Okay, so now I'm just going to click and copy the questionnaire. We'll do Q, we'll put in just questions like the list above, and I'm just going to scroll down so we can see clearly the output. Let's run that, A, B, and C. And so if I take a look, Q, we should have our list of answers. Okay, great. So let's take a look at a final example. So this one here is simply a dictionary of different months, so January all the way to June. And what we want to do is 2 different things. Firstly, we want to add up all the values for each of the months. So for example, January would be 60, so 10, 20, and 30. And then we also want to add up all the values for each of the months to get the total. So in this case, we're going to have a total of $953. And we just take a look at the total for each of the months at the bottom here for our output. So of course, January is 60, all the way to June is 243. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to convert these into 2 different functions. So where we have the D, which is our empty dictionary, I'm going to call this Kelsey months. And then I'm going to put in months equals an empty dictionary by default. And then I'm just going to simply grab all of this here and move it to the right. And then we'll simply return D. Okay, and then what I also want to do is I'm going to convert this other one here. So Kelsey year. And then we'll put in, let's say, arg. And I'm going to move this to the right. And of course, instead of this, it's going to be arg. And then I'm going to return total. Okay, so now let's see if we can get the same output. So here we're going to have, let's call this M. And we'll do Kelsey months. And we'll put in our months. We'll do M. And we have our output here. Okay, and then we want to put this M value, which is a dictionary. We want to put it in our Kelsey year. And we have the output here of $953. So the difference here for the 2 functions is that one of them has a parameter and the other one is actually an argument. So months is actually a parameter, whereas this one here is an argument. And the reason being is because Kelsey year depends upon the output of another function, whereas Kelsey months does not. And that's why Kelsey months has a parameter of months, whereas calci year has an argument, not a parameter. Okay, so I hope that's been insightful. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thanks.